Good morning. Y'all pray with me. Gracious and good Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessings of the day. Thank you for the blue skies that showed up this morning. Lead us and guide us. Let us do things that please you. Let us be reasonable with one another. Help us, keep us safe. Keep your mercy on us. In Jesus' name, amen. Good morning. Chairman to the front.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 987 is the second from the bottom on the last blue page. It's a little old measure that I was trying to help my seatmate with since he's tied up doing budget stuff, and all it does is say that a person that has a not-for-profit rodeo does not breach the CUVA covenant. And what we have is people in the state that raise rodeo stock, and the way they sell them is put on a rodeo, so the people that want to buy them can see how good this bull bucks or this calf outruns a rope or whatever. It's no different really than putting a tomato up on a fruit stand so you can look at the tomato you're fixing to buy. But for some reason or another, our tax assessors in this state need to go to class when it comes to CUVA legislation. But anyway, we have to do this to satisfy them so a fella doesn't lose his whole CUVA covenant.
If the next time that you have a question for those tax assessors, there's a fellow named Richard Royal that will be glad to explain it to them.
Yeah, and we have had to get him to my county to have one of those kind of Jesus too.
Yes. I like it that the fellow that wrote the law actually will do stuff for you. Any questions? And nobody asked the question, what is CUVA? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you moving it.
What? Mr. Hightower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the second page, second down, HB 171, the description there, the effect and enforcement of foreign law is a little bit off from what this bill does now. This has been worked on for about 4 years with help of Chairman Willard. This now is did have pushback from the chamber and our arbitration groups. They both are now satisfied with this bill and happy with what it does. What this bill simply does is in the forum nonconvenience clause of our law, the courts look at different factors before they transfer a case outside of venue to another venue, either another state or another country. And all this simply does is as a factor for the courts to look at. And that factor is that before the court transfers a case to another venue, they will look to make sure that that venue requires due process of law as required by the Constitution of the United States and the state of Georgia. It's just a protection for our citizens before the courts transfer to another venue.
Mr. Willard.
Thank you. And thank you, too, for the bill and working with us, Mr. Hightower. Is it not true we already have a statute in our general laws that addresses the question about foreign courts and foreign judgments and the enforcement rights of foreign laws in this state?
That's correct.
Thank you.
What this does is just as a factor in a different area for the courts to look at before they transfer venue.
Correct. Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Raffensperger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before you in the Rules Committee HB 790, which is on page 2 in the middle in modified structure rule. This is a bill that would increase penalties for swatting. And swatting is making a hoax 911 call with the idea that what will happen is that the SWAT team will come out, innocent people will be called. And what's happened is that people actually disguise where they're calling from, so it's not like the call's coming from that house. It appears that it's coming from that house, but it could be 20 miles away, 200 miles away, or 2,000 miles away. That happened in our city of Johns Creek about 2 years ago, January, while I was still on council. The Detective Sergeant Finley did the investigation. He spent over 1,000 hours to find the serial swatter, and this person made a livelihood. Working through the committee, what we did is we actually wanted to make sure that we didn't throw the book at little Johnny, some innocent kid. Not really innocent, but he didn't realize the full gravity of the situation. So for the first offender, it would actually be a high and aggravated misdemeanor. But for the person that commits a second or third, then it would step up the penalties up to 10 years. Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Hitchens.
Last bill on the last page, House Bill 991. What it does, it provides for members of the armed forces of the United States who are deployed to a combat zone by executive order of the President of the United States will have 60 days upon their return to pay their property taxes without incurring a late fee.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Escalation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two bills to present to the committee today. On page 2, the first is under Modified Structure Rule HB 770. This bill extends the human trafficking statute to include victims with developmental disabilities. It's supported by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Attorney General. Would ask for your favorable consideration. Second bill is just below that, HB 887. This gives priority placement in foster care decisions to relatives or fictive kin, which is defined as maybe somebody who doesn't have a blood relation, but the child has lived with them and there is a significant connection. Would ask for your favorable consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Willard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, let me ask you on 887, what does that do with regards to the standing legal principle we have now, which is the courts looking into what is in the best interest of that child?
Mr. Chairman, we preserve that standard in this bill, so the priority placement would be given only if the placement is still consistent with DFAC's policy and that it's in the best interest of the child. That is explicitly included.
Thank you.
No more questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two measures today also. Page 2, a majority of the way down, I'll start with House Bill 911. This is the Georgia Agricultural Tax Exemption, otherwise known as the Gate Card Reform Bill. This is a compilation of input from folks all over the state. We've got Department of Revenue, Department of Ag, farmers, and Farm Bureau, and other folks that have helped us take a good program and improve with some best learned practices. Highlights are extended to a 3-year renewal process and rulemaking capabilities from both Department of Ag and Department of Revenue. There's an amendment on your desks for this bill also.
Any questions on the bill? All right, next.
Mr. Chairman, next bill is House Bill 919. This is a rural health care reform bill. This approach fundamentally changes the way that we're going to help our rural hospitals, trying to keep their doors open. This is an approach that allows individuals and corporations throughout the state to laser focus their tax dollars for tax credits. We have 80 cents on the dollar tax credit that goes. Essentially, we eliminate the threat in this bill. The purpose of it is so that these hospitals can no longer fear about meeting payroll. They can keep their doors open and help service the health needs of those in their communities. There's also an amendment on your desk for this bill.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the bill, are there any limits included in this language, limits on how these dollars can be spent by these healthcare organizations? To it,
Could you better explain?
Certainly. Could these dollars be spent for acquisition of buildings, of land, of equipment, or is there a limit to how the dollars are actually allocated once they are received by the hospitals?
Yeah, I think the intent with this was to make sure that we didn't put limits on their ability to service their communities. For example, if a community, a lot of the feedback we've got from these rural locations are they need to be able to buy MRI machines and other equipment of that nature to better serve their communities. Our mechanism, checks and balance mechanism, is through a 990 form that you'll see that helps to better identify for the community and give oversight. These 990 forms are, as I understand it, currently a part of a requirement that's out there, but not all organizations. What we've seen is that some of the, analysis done on some of these failing rural healthcare organizations has been that these 990 forms have not been filed. And so some of the input we've got is that's an important mechanism for this measure.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get the amendments out of the way. On your desk on 911, it is AM 340728. You want to explain the amendment?
The amendment here, we're taking the threshold proposed in the bill from $10,000 in an aggregate revenue down to $7,500. We received some input that may be a better number. And then secondly, we wanted to make sure we address the needs of the most rural retailers and allow them, if they don't have internet access, to be able to engage via phone to verify the gate card holder's card is still valid.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve that amendment? All right, anybody opposed? All right, it'll be on with the bill. All right, on your desk, you've got AM 340727. This is another amendment from Mr. Powell and Mr. Duncan. Tell me what it does.
Simply reducing the requested amount of $250 million down to $100 million. Received some input from around the building and from some folks that felt like $100 million gets us to where this program is still very effective and able to make a huge difference in our rural hospitals.
Any questions on that amendment? Do I hear a motion? Any opposed to that amendment? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Those opposed? It's on your desk. You have another amendment, AM 340729. Ms. Abrams, would you like to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I applaud the intent of HB 919, my concern about even a $100 million credit is that under the current terms of this bill, there are no restrictions on how those dollars must be spent by the rural health organization once the funds are received. So we do a very good job on the front end about how the monies are contributed, but we do nothing about how the monies are spent. The 990 form, while it is a strong mechanism, is not a perfect mechanism. It's Part 7, Section B of that form requires that you only list the top 5 independent contractors, meaning, and they have to receive at least $100,000, meaning you can do multiple contracts for $99,000 and aggregate those contracts and never have to report that information. This also does not restrict these hospitals from using these funds to purchase land, to purchase buildings, to purchase equipment that's not directly related to their usage. And the 990 form does not categorize any of those purchases. There is no way to access that information. I used to do 990 forms for hospitals. And one of the reasons that they are an imperfect mechanism, and often you are required to, in addition, provide audited financials, is that those audited financials are usually the only mechanism to demonstrate the actual use of those dollars. There's no other mechanism that this body can enforce to request that information. And so while I support the idea, I think $50 million is a good starter program for us to be able to evaluate this information, because the last piece is that the filing of a 990 occurs 3 months after the close of a fiscal year and can be extended up to 9 months, and then with special dispensation, which is very routinely granted, can take up to 2 years. meaning that we have spent money year after year before the first time we're 2 years in before the first year that we can actually evaluate the utility of this program, other than self-reporting. And so for that reason, I would urge this body to reduce the amount to $50 million as a start, with the understanding that it could grow after that time.
Mr. Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A little bit of trepidation. I hate to be the one that points out the rule necessarily on this, but that line has already been amended, so the actual language in Leader Abrams' amendment would not be appropriate because it's amending a line that's already been amended. We either have to take one or the other, and this is not a qualitative statement on either one. I just don't want us to get in the habit of amending an amendment with language that is not specific to the actual amendment. In other words, if that we just passed that previous amendment in 2.7, did we not?
Yes, sir.
So the amendment that's now in front of us does not is not amending. By example, it would have to amend $100 million down to 50, not 250 down to 50. I know that's a persnickety.
You know, that's the most wonderful thing about sitting up here. I've got you sitting out there. I've got Calvin sitting right over yonder, and he's doing like a little dog in the back of the car. Therefore, the amendment that we just read is out of order. Okay. That's all. Excuse me, I've got Mr. Weldon. Do you want to add anything? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to try a different tack today and go in reversed order. The first bill is under Structured Rule 939. I have no amendments to offer because this bill is perfect in every way. I know that because it came to me from the Judicial Council and Administrative Office of the Courts in order to do some minor changes to HB 1000 from 2014. This is to simplify and strengthen the process controls in order for the Administrative Office of the Courts to efficiently transmit tax refund intercepts to participating courts. So it cleans up language and it puts the money in the final court where the debt is owed.
Well, we do have questions. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Price, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is a little bit of a cleanup of a bill we passed 2 years ago where we allowed deadbeats who don't pay their fines. We allowed the local governments to allow the Department of Revenue to help them pay that by taking it out of their income tax. Isn't that right?
Correct. That's exactly it.
However, one thing this cleanup bill does that you've got is occasionally a mistake is made and the money needs to come back to the taxpayer because he actually did pay his fine, and your bill will make it easier for that taxpayer to get his money back if the mistake was made. Isn't that right?
Yes, it will be at the local level. Correct. And there have been no appeals in the pilot project so far.
No more questions. Next one.
The second bill is under Modified Structured Rule, page 2, about 2/3 of the way down, HB 897. And this is the drug repository program that replaces an unused law that we have passed in years past that puts this drug repository program under the Department of Public Health. Why this bill is necessary is, one, we have unused drugs going to waste, and we would hate to think that they would get flushed down the toilet and possibly threaten our state riverine fish. Also, we would hate to see that people who are in the category of indigent, uninsured, underinsured, or enrolled in a public assistance program would not have the benefits to get these drugs at a reduced rate. I ask for your favorable consideration of both those bills.
Ms. Price, are you going to bring any more bills?
There's a good chance, yes.
Don't.
Thank you, sir.
Have a nice day. Mr. Workheiser.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. On the first page, the sixth bill under modified open is House Bill 749. It simply allows the regional commissions to use the same tool that our statewide boards are allowed under the open meeting rules, and that is to use teleconferencing for their meetings. And this only applies to regional commissions.
No questions.
Ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Earhart.
Mr. Chairman, I was in error with respect to that. The actual rule would be on the floor. If the previous amendment that we agreed passes, then this amendment would be out of order on the floor of the House. Since this is a modified structured rule, you're just sending these amendments to the floor to be considered. So Leader Abrams' amendment qualifies for consideration by the Rules Committee, but would be out of order if the previous amendment passes on the floor.
Mr. Smyrie.
Mr. Chairman, I thought that once the amount is lower than the previous amount, then it always will be in order.
I think what has happened is what I did was correct. I don't want to tell you all that, but so we're going to go back. There's not anybody in there. We're going to go back to that amendment that Ms. Abrams is putting an amendment on the floor. There's another amendment that you've just approved, and she's asking for her amendment to be put on the floor so that the body can vote on it, which is legal. So now I will again ask for a motion on AM 340729. I think the reconsideration move is the correct one. We have a move to reconsider. Anybody opposed to that? Nobody's opposed. All right, now we have the amendment AM 340729 for a motion to put on the floor to allow the body to vote. Again, the bill is a structured bill, so it's modified structure. It's supposed to be structured. We'll move it. But again, do I hear a move for AM 340729? You have moves. Those opposed to that signify by aye. Opposed, I did it backwards. Opposed to that. Raise your hands if you're opposed to putting it on the floor. Raise your hands if you're for putting it on the floor. It's on the floor. Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, on page 2 on the modified structure, the last bill is 979, and what this bill does, it does not change any evidentiary procedures or any evidentiary rules. It simply says that if you commit an aggravated assault on an emergency health care worker, which is people that work in the emergency room as well as EMSs, it will enhance the punishment from 1 to 20 to 5 to 20. So it just raises the minimum from 1 to 5 years. That's where you start with their punishment. That's all the bill does. This is somewhat of a result of a study committee which Chairman Dempsey chaired with people from the Senate in 2014. And I'd ask for your favorable consideration. Of course, I'm willing to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the gentleman, doesn't this just make emergency medical workers' status consistent with For example, people who would attack police officers and the like?
Presently, if you have an aggravated assault on a police officer or somebody over 65 like me, or even transit workers, other individuals, so all this does is brings it up and equal with them, as well as correctional officers. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Atwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I bring before you House Bill 736. It's under the modified structured rule on page 2, about halfway down. This is our annual consolidated tag bill, simple amendment to OCGA 4286 to create some new tags. This is our consolidated bill, doing many things that Chairman Rice very graciously allowed me to carry. It has tags to restore and enhance our marine habitat, military award tags, our woman veteran tags, and fraternity tags. We also have a friendly amendment honoring Hampton University that I don't object to. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions if there are any.
No questions, but while you're standing there, let's get the amendment out of the way. On your desk, you've got AM 390153. That's the amendment that adds Hampton University to the tags. Do I hear a motion on that amendment? Is anybody opposed to that amendment? That amendment will be on. It passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, y'all. First page, fifth up, H.R. 900 simply lays out how the legislature, our bodies, will send members to the assemblies of state legislatures. The assemblies are looking at rules for if ever an Article 5 convention is called.
Would you mind telling them the appointments?
Sure. The Speaker of the House appoints 2. The Minority Chair appoints 1 from the House, and in the Senate, the Pro Tem appoints 2, and the Minority Leader appoints 1, as well as it provides for alternate members as well for each of those appointments.
Any questions, Mr. Barr? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Wilkerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, today I bring to you House Bill 542, which is on the first page under modified open rule. This enhances our current 529 plan that Georgia has by providing incentives to low to moderate income families to save for college. What it would do is take our current 529 plan is great. However, the majority of the people that use it make over $100,000. Actually, 50% in a lot of studies make over $150,000 a year. So what this will do is provide 2 matching programs. The first one would be if you make below $30,000, would match 2 to 1 up to $500, and then if you make between $30,000 and $60,000 a year, it would match 1 to 1 up to $500 a year. If you do not go to college, the money comes back to the state, and just like traditional 529 plans that did not change, the money would be taxed and sent back to the families that they do not go to college. It is based on appropriations from the General Assembly, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, guys, for your favorable consideration.
Ms. Beskin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I have 2 bills this morning. The first is towards the bottom of page 2, House Bill 959. This is the annual Title 20 Education Housekeeping Bill. The second bill is on page 3 towards the top, House Bill 766, and this addresses 2 provisions regarding homestead exemptions, qualification for homestead exemptions. That's in Chapter 5 of Title 48, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have or ask for your favorable consideration.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Scott.
Good morning, Mr. Speakers and members of the committee. I bring House Bill 913 on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs and the 100,000 plus female veterans of Georgia. House Bill 913 is to create a female veterans coordinator position.
No questions, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring for your consideration today House Bill 922, the last page under structured rule, fourth from the top. This bill seeks to clarify the definition of companies eligible for quality job tax credits. I should say clarify how these tax credits roll up to the parent company. While it might throw you with in the language where it talks about disregarded entities, these are effectively LLCs that are single-member LLCs, where the taxes are paid by the parent company. It comes without objection from the Department of Revenue. Happy to answer any questions.
No questions.
Thank you. Ask for your favorable consideration.
Mr. Smith.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Rules Committee. I bring to you House Bill 825, which is on the back of the first page, midpoint, Protecting Military Children's Act. BRAC, which stands for the Base Realignment and Closure, is the congressionally authorized process Department of Defense has used to reorganize its base structure to more efficiently and effectively support our forces, increase operational readiness, and facilitate, new ways of doing business. Ensuring family and child advocacy compliance between federal, state, and local governments is one of the 10 recommendations for BRAC, and several states, including South Carolina, have passed laws to fulfill this critical recommendation, but unfortunately, Georgia is currently not one of them. To address this issue, I have introduced House Bill 825, the Protecting Military Children Act, to provide for the free exchange of information between the Division of Family and Children Services and the Department of Defense to ensure that allegations of child abuse or neglect are promptly investigated, appropriately reviewed, and resolved for the benefit of children of military families. House Bill 825 will protect military children who transition between bases, making their record more accessible to those who can continue assisting military children and will better help address their specific needs. I'm honored to say that this bill has received bipartisan support and passed unanimously out of committee, and I ask the committee for a favorable consideration.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 921 to give our United States Marine Corps veterans coming home the opportunity with a short window to pay their taxes. And also House Bill Representative Harrell's 937 to fulfill a requirement by the NFL so that we may be eligible for a Super Bowl.
Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified open rule, I'd like to ask for and put my name beside House Bill 934. That would require the Department of Human Services to set up a website for kinship caregivers. On the second page, under modified structure, I'd like to put my name beside.
Mr. Benton, hold on one second, please. I missed the number on that one. The first
one, 934, first page.
Okay, sorry.
And under modified structure, I'd like to put my name beside Representative Caldwell's bill, House Bill 979. And on the third page under structured, beside Representative McCall's House Bill 987.
Mr. Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask for the committee's consideration of HB 205. Chairman Rice's bill has been worked on for 4 years now.
in non-civil judiciary committee, and I think this is perhaps the year we can hear it on the floor.
Mr. Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 605, which is on the second page on the modified structured, almost a third of the way down. This is a bill that revises the judicial retirement system and enables us to have a fair and equitable calculation to give part-time judges credit if they move into full-time service. This is something that's going to help. It's beneficial to the state and to the system, because the way we're doing it now is we're taking away vested rights that people have, and this will help us avoid that becoming a big problem when judges move from part-time to full-time. This, the actuarial study done on this doesn't show any additional costs other than having, when we have people move from part-time to full-time, there's always going to be some transactional costs for that, but this is not any unsystematic cost that's being required.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 216 and House Bill 991, represented the Hitchens bill.
Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside under modified open House Bill 542 and under structured rule House Bill 802. Both of these bills encourage college savings through the 529 plans.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside, this is under the structured rule, HB 766, Representative Baskin's bill, HB 987, Representative McCall's bill, and 991, Representative Hitchens' bill.
Mr. Smyrie.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add my name to House Bill 736 on the modified structure rule, and House Bill 913 under modified open rule. Thank you.
Mr. C. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Second page is House Bill 943, contracts dealing for architects and engineers. I think there was a concern, but I think all the concerns have been eliminated. Obviously not. I see a hand go up. So I was told it was worked out.
Let me do this. I have a note on my own. It would be nice for the two gentlemen here to speak with the gentleman back there, and let's work together here. Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add my name to House Bill 913. I believe the funds are already available for that position, and also House Bill 825.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Out of an abundance of optimism, I would like to ask for consideration today of HB 962 under modified open rule. This is a bill that is the result of a kinship care study committee that this body authorized last year. One of the findings is that we have multiple agencies that are supporting kinship caregivers, and these are grandparents, aunts, uncles, fictive kin who are taking in children to keep them out of the foster care system. And they're entitled to certain services but have a difficult time navigating. This is HB 962 on page 1, modified open rule. This would create within the Department of Family and Children Services a kinship care enforcement administrator. Working with both the second floor and with Commissioner Cagle, this bill does not require any additional funds. They would simply reorganize within the existing resources, but this allows them to manage interagency discussions, to monitor the provision of services to kinship caregivers and to help manage the additional 10 navigators that the budget included this year for a total of 25 kinship care navigators across the state. And to put a fine point on it, we have more than 128,000 families that are participating in this program right now, and this would allow us to have a single point of contact to do the monitoring and management of these programs. And ask for your favorable consideration.
Mr. Earhart.
And I was afraid, Mr. Chairman, that if I pressed mine, you might miss me, so I used Earl's.
I wouldn't have. I probably wouldn't have recognized you. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for, on the page 2 near the top, Modified Structured House Bill 508. 508. This is a bill which deals with the judicial retirement system. Right now in the state of Georgia, all our state-level judges are eligible for retirement at age 60, except for about 20 of them, and those are the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. This would make their retirement age the same as all the other judges in the state at age 60. There is a small impact to the budget, but we've already spoken with the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and he's informed us that if we do this, he will have the approximately $400,000 in the budget what it will take to accomplish that bill.
Mr. T. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified structure on the second page, about midway down, I'd like to ask your favorable consideration of HB 868. It's a budget. It's a bill brought by the administration under the Zero Budgeting Act. It simply eliminates the Georgia Games Commission. That's been replaced by a 501c3 foundation, and we haven't funded it in 2008, and we just want to take it off the books.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask for consideration of HB 499. This would authorize the use of automated traffic enforcement devices, detection devices, basically speed zone cameras in school zones. Currently, we use these for school buses, red light cameras, and toll roads and such. And this is just a good way that we can slow traffic down in the most dangerous parts of our roadways, and that's around school zones. It allows for civil penalties, not a specific fine or points, and basically tracks the rest of the laws. You can they're only enforceable after 10 miles over the speed limit. Provides for signage to posted signage prior to the speed zone and the times that it can be used.
Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask for HB 905. It helps make kids safer here in Georgia, and I'd also like to put my name beside HB 171.
What was the number again, Ms. Ballinger?
The first one was HB 905. It's 2/3 of the way down on the second page. And I'd like to put my name beside HB 171, which is second from the top on the same page.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask Chairman Powell, I did not hear his remarks, Bill, he was discussing with respect to school safety zones. What's the, could the gentleman kind of restate the summary?
Which part would you like to know about?
You talked about what are we allowing to happen? I know you said it's a civil.
Right now the state authorized use of cameras on red lights, school buses to stop people that are passing school buses, stop school buses, and also toll roads. This would allow the use of these speed zone cameras in school zones.
No, Mr. Chairman, that's a big departure from, I mean, a school bus that's got a camera on it. I think we passed a couple years ago, and it's been our policy that school bus cameras have been used for people to run around school buses you know, we've had this big debate about red light cameras, so we put some significant restrictions on. I lived in a country where they used speeding cameras all the time, and I'm concerned what we've got is a circumstance where it's a civil penalty. It's not a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. You've got a preponderance of the evidence standard that's all that needs to be proven for someone to have to pay a fine. That is a dramatic departure from where we've been before with respect to speed enforcement, is it not?
Well, I disagree, respectfully disagree. These cameras will be, it's in the legislation that they have to be tested every 30 days, self-tested, and a calibration annually. They're under the jurisdiction of a registered or a post-certified officer. The controls are in there that if you have been issued a citation for a civil penalty for speeding through a school zone, then you can contest it if it was not your vehicle, or if there was someone else driving, that you have that right to contest that with a hearing. So
but isn't it true that it's prima facie evidence against you from the start, and the standard to prove that you did it is a civil standard, which is way lower. If a police officer in the city of Kennesaw uses the same fully calibrated speed detection device, they still have a beyond a reasonable doubt standard to prove that you were speeding. This lowers the bar from basically 100% certainty to 51% certainty, and it shifts the burden of proof to the individual. It just changes the whole traffic enforcement system, does it not? I mean, that's what it does, and I just think members ought to understand what the bill does.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Powell. Jay Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have been hearing reports in the gate card program of fraud and abuse for the last several years, and I would like to put my name by HB 911, which is under modified structure, because this will strengthen that program and put in auditing and verification components that don't currently exist.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for HB 205 under modified structured, which Chairman Setzler so graciously asked for a little bit ago. I'd also like to put my name beside House Bill 790, Raffensperger's swatting bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On page 3, structured rule, I'd like to mention and ask for 3 bills. House Bill 935, which adds local approval for fulfillment centers for ad valorem tax exemption. House Bill 936, the next one down, which clarifies the definition of a job tax credit. And finally, House Bill 937, which extends the sunset provision for projects of regional significance. And also, our chairman graciously reminded me that I also have House Bill 981 that provides local approval for a property tax abatement for facilities that house mentally disabled. Thank you.
Okay. This is setting the calendar for Thursday, the 28th day. Under modified structure, HB 205. Any opposed? It's modified structure, HB 770. Any opposed? Modified structure, HB 897.
Move.
Any opposed? Its own. Modified structure, HB 905. Any opposition? Its own. Under modified structure, HB 911. Remember, it has an amendment. Any opposed? Its own. Under modified structure, HB 919. Remember, it has an amendment. Its own. Under structured, HB 216. Do I hear a move? Any opposed? All right, we've got we've got opposition. HB 216. All those in favor, raise your hand. Y'all all raise them now, so rather than one at a time throughout the day. Okay. Well, those opposed, it's on. Under structured, HB 802. Any opposed? It's on. Under structured, HB 939. Any opposed? It's on. Under structured, HB 981.
Move.
Any opposed? It's on. Under structured, HB 987. Any opposed? I'm gonna have to save up and give y'all something to do on day 30, so that's it.
Excuse me. Thank you.